Hi, I'm George Woodbury from College of the Sequoias in Visalia, California, and in this video I'm going to talk about multiplying integers. This is a request from a viewer who wanted to know why a positive times a negative was a negative, so we'll try to address that as well as the general rules. Okay, the rules that you need to remember: if you multiply a positive number by a positive number, the product is positive. If you multiply either a positive number by a negative number or a negative by a positive number, that result is negative. And finally, if we multiply a negative number by a negative number, that result is positive. If you saw the movie Stand and Deliver, this is one of the things they said a lot in the movie: a negative times a negative is a positive. One of those things they just repeated over and over until they had that memorized. But you really want to understand or find some pattern to help you remember. And generally, if we multiply two numbers with the same sign, either positive times positive or negative times negative, that product is positive. But if we multiply two numbers with different signs, like in these two examples, then that product is negative. Right, let's go over some of the ideas behind this. Why is a negative times a positive equal to a negative number? Okay. Mathematics is really all about patterns. So let's start with some patterns that we understand. Let's take a look at these four products first. 3 times 5 we know is 15. 2 times 5 is 10. 1 times 5 is 5. And 0 times 5 is 0. Okay. Haven't seen a negative number yet, but I want you to notice the pattern. I used the second factor of 5 in all of these products. And as the first factor drops by 1, the product is dropping by 5. Right? As we go from 2 to 1, we go from 10 down to 5. And again, from 1 to 0, we drop by 5 for the product. So if we drop that first factor by 1 more to negative 1, this product is going to drop by 5 again. And 0 minus 5, that's negative 5. So here we have a negative number times a positive number being negative. We can continue the pattern, right? Negative 2 times 5 is negative 10. Negative 3 times 5 is negative 15, and so on. Notice it's really the same as 3 times 5, just with a negative sign in front of it. And so the same thing also applies if the second factor had been negative instead of the first one. Okay? So hopefully this will help you understand why a negative times a positive is a negative. Let's move on and talk about why a negative times a negative is positive. We'll go with the pattern again. From before, 3 times negative 5, that's a positive times a negative. We know that that equals negative 15. And 2 times negative 5 is negative 10. 1, oops, didn't need to write the parentheses there, but so be it. 1 times negative 5 is negative 5. And 0 times negative 5 is 0. Notice what's happening here. As this first factor drops by 1, our product is increasing by 5. Right? From 2 to 1, we go up by 5. From 1 to 0, we go up by 5. So if I drop this first factor by 1 more, negative 1 times negative 5, I'm going to increase this product by 5. Well, 0 plus 5 is 5. So I have a negative 1 times a negative 5 equals positive 5. Continuing the pattern, negative 2 times negative 5 is positive 10, and so on. So here we've come up with why a negative times a negative is a positive. Let's look at this negative 3 times negative 5 in a slightly different light. Negative 3 times negative 5 can be rewritten as negative 1 times 3 times negative 1 times 5. We can rewrite the order here as negative 1 times negative 1 times 3 times 5. That's the commutative property. We're allowed to associate these any way we want. So I know here that -1 times 3 times 5 is -15. So I've got -1 times -15. But -1 I can write without that, the 1 even being there. This is really equivalent to the opposite of -15, and the opposite of -15 is +15. So this is another way you can think about a negative times a negative being positive. Let's just blitz through a few quick examples. 7 times -8. I have one negative factor, one positive. So when I multiply these out, 7 times -8, that's -56. 7 times 8 is 56. And because there's one negative sign, one negative factor, my product is negative. -9 times -6. I really like to take care of the sign first. Here I have a negative times a negative. I know my product is going to be positive. Now I just worry about what is 9 times 6, and that's 54. Let's take a look at one more example that has a lot more factors. Maybe something like this. -5 times -2 times 3 times -4 times, let's say 7. Okay. Now we can multiply from left to right, two numbers at a time, and that's fine, but I'd still like to try to figure out what my sign is going to be. I know that when I multiply these first two negative factors, that product is positive. Positive times positive is also positive. When I multiply that by a negative number, I'm going to get a negative product. And when I multiply a negative number times a positive, that's going to leave me with a negative product. So I know my result's going to be negative. Basically, when you have more than two factors, if there are an odd number of negative factors, that means that your product will be negative. Basically, we pair them up, and every two negatives when we multiply makes a positive. If there's a leftover negative, that means that your product will be negative. Now, since I know it's going to be negative, I want to try to multiply this in a convenient fashion. I know that 5 times 2 is 10. I can even do 10 times 3 in my head to get 30. 4 times 7 I know is 28. So now it's left to multiply 28 by 30. My product is -840. All right. So if you have any questions or comments about this topic or any others, or a request for a video of your own, you can leave a comment on the video, or you can reach me through the contact page on my website, and that address is georgewoodbury.com. Thanks for watching, and good luck with these.